Before we begin tonight's journey into the world of Westeros, a quick note. If you enjoy these relaxing Game of Thrones stories, you can also listen on Spotify. Just search for Whispers of Westeros or simply use the link in the description below. Follow the podcast and continue the journey anytime, even with your screen off. Now settle in, get comfortable, and let the story begin.
Before the wall stood tall, before the Night's Watch took its vows, the world knew a darkness so complete that the sun itself seemed to have abandoned mankind. This is where our story begins. Not in the age of kings or the time of dragons, but in an age so distant that history blurs into legend and legend fades into myth. 8,000 years before Aegon's conquest, Westeros was a different world. The first men had made their peace with the children of the forest after 4,000 years of war. The old gods watched from their weirwood groves. The great houses we know today had not yet been founded. There were no Starks ruling from Winterfell, no Lannisters in Casterly Rock. Instead, hundreds of petty kings ruled from hill forts and wooden halls, each claiming dominion over a few miles of forest or coastline. The seasons were strange even then. Summer could last a generation. Winter could kill entire kingdoms. But the people had learned to survive. They stored food in the long summers. They built their halls with thick walls. They passed down the old stories from father to son, mother to daughter. And in those stories, there were warnings. Warnings about the cold. Warnings about the dark. Warnings that no one truly believed until it was almost too late. The long night came without warning, though the signs were there for those who knew how to read them. The summer had been long, perhaps too long, 20 years of warmth and plenty. Then autumn came, brief and bitter. Winter followed, as it always did. But this winter was different. This winter did not end. The sun rose later each day, until it barely rose at all. Darkness claimed the land. The cold grew deeper than any cold the first men had known. Snow fell for years without stopping. Lakes froze solid. Rivers became roads of ice. Crops died in the fields. Cattle starved in their pens. The children cried for food that did not exist. The old froze in their beds. And still the darkness grew. But the darkness brought something worse than cold and hunger. It brought them. The others, the White Walkers, the cold gods. They have many names in the old stories, but all the names carry the same terror. They came from the far north, from the land of always winter, from places where no man had ever returned. They came on the wind. They came in the snow. They came with eyes like blue stars and hands that froze the blood in your veins. The dead walked with them. Men who had fallen to the cold rose again with those same blue eyes. They did not eat. They did not sleep. They did not tire. They killed everything warm and living, and what they killed joined their ranks. Village after village fell. Holdfasts were found empty, their people gone, only frozen blood marking where they had stood. Armies marched north to fight this enemy, and they never came back. The first men fought as best they could. They were warriors, hard and proud. They had defeated the children of the forest in the wars that came before. But how do you fight an enemy that cannot die? How do you stand against the cold itself? Steel shattered in the freeze. Fire was swallowed by the darkness. The bravest warriors fell, and their corpses turned against their brothers. The children of the forest fought beside them. The old alliance held, even in the face of extinction. The greenseers wielded their magic. The singers called upon the old gods. They fought with obsidian blades that could kill what steel could not. But even the children were dying. Their sacred groves burned with cold fire, their caves filled with ice. The weirwoods wept frozen tears. Desperation drove the survivors south. Entire kingdoms abandoned their lands and fled before the advancing darkness. But the others followed, the dead followed, and there was nowhere left to run. The last hero's journey began in this moment of absolute despair. The tales say he was a warrior of the first men, though his true name has been lost to time. Some meisters believe he was a king. Others say he was just a man who refused to surrender. The stories agree on this much. He set out into the darkness with 12 companions, a horse and a dog. He sought the children of the forest, hoping their magic could turn the tide. He needed to find a way to fight back, or all of mankind would perish in the cold. His journey took him deep into the lands of always winter. One by one, his companions died. The cold claimed them. The others hunted them. The dead found them in the darkness. His horse fell and did not rise. His dog died defending him from the frozen corpses of his friends. And still, he walked alone through the endless night. What he found in those frozen wastes, no one knows for certain. Some tales say he discovered the children in their deepest caves, where the last of their magic still burned. Others claim he found something older, something from before the children, before the first men, before even the long night itself. The stories grow vague here, wrapped in the mystery of 8,000 years. But he returned. Somehow, the last hero survived and came back from the dead lands, and he brought hope with him. Hope and knowledge, and perhaps something more. Some readers of these old tales believe he learned the secret of how to forge the weapons that could kill the others. Dragon glass and dragon steel, obsidian and Valyrian steel, though Valyria itself would not rise for thousands of years to come. The histories are unclear on these details, and we must be careful not to claim certainty where there is only legend. What we know with more confidence is this: the tide began to turn. The alliance between the first men and the children grew stronger. They discovered that dragon glass could shatter the others. They learned that fire could slow them, though not stop them. They found ways to fight back, to hold ground, to push the darkness north. And there was Azor Ahai. The legend of the hero with the burning sword exists in many cultures across the known world. In Westeros, some believe he was the last hero himself, returned with a blade of fire. In Ashai, they tell of a warrior who fought the darkness with Lightbringer, a sword forged through sacrifice and magic. Did such a hero truly exist? Did one person turn the tide? Or was Azor Ahai a name given to many heroes, a symbol of resistance rather than a single man? The masters debate these questions still. The Red Priests claim certainty, but their certainty is faith, not history. What the old stories agree upon is that heroes rose in the darkness. They fought when all seemed lost. They gave their lives so that others might live. And slowly, step by step, battle by battle, they drove the others back. The battle for the dawn came at last. The final confrontation between the living and the dead. The stories painted as a single great battle, but it may have been many battles, fought across many years. The first men and the children fought side by side. They wielded fire and dragon glass. They called upon the old gods and whatever magic remained in the world. And they won. The sun returned. The long night ended. The others were defeated, driven back into the far north, into the land of always winter. The dead fell and did not rise again. The survivors emerged from their caves and refugees to find a world covered in snow and ice, but a world where the sun shone once more. They had survived, but barely. The world that emerged from the long night was transformed. Entire kingdoms had been wiped away. Bloodlines had ended. The population of Westeros had been devastated. The children of the forest had been reduced to a remnant of their former power. And the first men who remained knew they had come within a sword's edge of total extinction. They also knew something else, something that would shape the next 8,000 years. The others had been defeated, but not destroyed. They had been driven back, but not killed. They had retreated into the far north, and there they remained, waiting in the frozen dark. And one day, the survivors knew, one day they would return. The darkness always returns. When the first spring after the long night finally came, the survivors faced a choice. They could try to forget the horror they had endured. They could rebuild their kingdoms and return to their old wars and old rivalries. Or they could prepare. They could make sure that when the darkness came again, mankind would be ready. They chose to prepare. And that choice led to the founding of the greatest defensive structure the world has ever seen. That choice led to the Wall and to the Night's Watch. The men who had survived the long night understood what most of the world would forget in the centuries to come. They understood that the real enemy was not other men. The real enemy was the cold, the dark, the others, and that enemy required eternal vigilance. The age of heroes gave way to a new age, an age where the children of the survivors would stand guard against the darkness, an age where men would take an oath that bound them for life, an age where the wall would rise 800 feet of ice and magic, stretching from the sea to the mountains. But the wall did not build itself, and the Night's Watch did not spring fully formed from legend. The story of how that great order was founded begins with a builder, a man whose name would echo through history, a man who some say had the blood of the first men and the magic of the old gods running through his veins. His name was Brandon the builder, and he would raise a wall to hold back the night. But before we follow Brandon to the wall, we must understand what the long night taught those who survived it. It taught them that summer makes men soft. It taught them that plenty breeds forgetfulness. It taught them that the greatest threats come not from the south, where men fight over crowns and castles, but from the north, where things that should not exist wait in the frozen dark. These lessons were bought in blood and darkness. Thousands died learning them. Entire generations were lost. But the survivors remembered. They carved the memories into stone. They wove them into songs. They made sure their children would know. And when Brandon the builder began his great work, he built more than a wall. He built a monument to those lessons, a reminder that would stand for 8,000 years. The age of heroes was ending. The age of the Night's Watch was about to begin. And the men who took those first vows, who stood that first watch, who manned those first castles along the wall, they knew exactly what they were guarding against. They had seen it with their own eyes. They had fought it with their own hands. They had watched their loved ones die in the cold and rise again with blue eyes. From there, everything would change. The wall would rise, the watch would form, and the long vigil would begin. 8,000 years ago, Bran the Builder raised the greatest monument mankind has ever known. Not to glory, but to fear. The wall stands today as it stood then, a barrier of ice and ancient magic stretching 100 leagues from the Bay of Seals to the Frostfangs. It rises 800 feet into the cold northern sky, wide enough at its crown for a dozen armored knights to ride abreast. It is the largest structure ever built by human hands, and it exists for one purpose: to make sure that what happened during the long night can never happen again. Brandon Stark, called the Builder, was already a legend before he raised the wall. The stories credit him with building Winterfell, Storm's End, and a dozen other great castles across Westeros. Some Meisters doubt that one man could have accomplished so much. They suggest that Brandon the Builder might have been several men, or a title passed from father to son, each adding to the legend. But the small folk believe, and the North remembers. They say that Brandon had the blood of the first men running pure and strong. They say he could speak with the children of the forest and command the old magic that still lived in the world. Whether one man or many, the task before Brandon was impossible by any measure. He needed to build a wall that would stretch from sea to mountain. It needed to be tall enough that nothing could climb it, strong enough that nothing could break it, and it needed to last forever, because the threat it guarded against was eternal. Stone would crumble, wood would rot, but ice, properly preserved, could endure for ages. The wall is made of ice, but not the ice that forms on winter ponds. This is ice that has been frozen for 8,000 years, compressed and hardened until it is stronger than stone. The Meisters say that ice cannot possibly maintain such strength for so long. They claim that there must be stone at the core, hidden beneath layers of frozen water. They are wrong, but their skepticism is understandable. The wall should not exist. By all natural laws, it should have melted long ago. But the wall is not natural. It never was. Brandon had help building his great barrier. The children of the forest lent their magic to the construction. The old songs say that the green seers wove spells into the ice itself, spells that would strengthen it against time and weather and the dark things that might seek to tear it down. Some stories claim that giants helped raise the ice, their massive strength moving blocks that 100 men could not shift. Whether these tales are true or merely the exaggerations of time, we cannot say with certainty. But something beyond normal construction methods created the wall, something that the world has forgotten how to do. The wall was not built in a day or a year or even a lifetime. The oldest accounts suggest it took decades to complete. Brandon organized thousands of workers. The first men brought ice from frozen lakes and rivers. They cut blocks from glaciers in the mountains. They hauled these massive pieces to the construction site and fit them together with a precision that seems impossible without modern tools. And through it all, Brandon directed the work, following plans that perhaps only he could see. But the wall alone was not enough. A barrier is useless without men to defend it. A wall cannot watch for enemies or sound warnings or stand ready with weapons in hand. Brandon understood this. He knew that the wall required guardians, men who would dedicate their lives to watching and waiting, men who would stand ready for an enemy that might not come again for 1,000 years or 10,000 years, men who would sacrifice everything, their families, their lands, their very futures, to keep the realms of men safe. This is how the Night's Watch was born. Not as an army or a military order, but as something more fundamental. A brotherhood bound by sacred oaths, a permanent garrison that would never abandon its post. The first brothers came from those who had survived the long night. They had seen the others with their own eyes. They had watched the dead rise and march. They needed no convincing about the importance of the watch. They volunteered willingly, knowing exactly what they were defending against. Brandon gave them the gift, a stretch of land south of the wall that would support the Night's Watch for generations to come. The gift was 50 leagues deep, from the wall to the hills and forests of the north. It was good land, fertile enough to grow crops in the short summers, with forests for hunting and rivers full of fish. The gift would allow the watch to feed itself, to maintain its independence from the great houses and the Iron Throne. The brothers would not need to beg for supplies or bend their knee to southern lords. They would be self-sufficient, beholden to no one but their vows. The first castle built along the wall was the Night Fort. It stands at roughly the center of the wall's length, positioned to respond to threats from either direction. The Night Fort is the oldest castle on the wall, and for thousands of years it served as the headquarters of the Night's Watch. It is also the largest, with enough space to house 5,000 fighting men, though it has never held anywhere near that number in recorded history. The Night Fort is a dark place, full of shadows and secrets. Its halls are vast and empty. Its towers reach toward the sky like grasping fingers. The Black Brothers, who once manned its walls, told stories about the things that lived in its depths. They spoke of the blind, pale spiders as big as hounds that spun their webs in the lower levels. They whispered about sounds in the night, footsteps where no one walked, voices that called from empty rooms. Whether these stories are true or simply the product of long, dark winters and too much isolation, the Night Fort has always carried a reputation for being haunted. But in those early days, the Night Fort was simply necessary. It was the command center from which the Lord Commander directed the entire length of the wall. It held the largest armory, the most extensive food stores, the records of the Watcher's history. Everything important happened at the Night Fort. Every major decision was made in its halls. The Lord Commander lived there. The brothers trained there. And there, in that ancient fortress of black stone and timber, the traditions of the Night's Watch were forged. The first brothers established the vows that every man of the Night's Watch still swears today. Night gathers, and now my watch begins. These words have been spoken by tens of thousands of men over 8 millennia. They bind a man for life. They strip away his old identity and give him a new purpose. A brother of the Night's Watch gives up his family name, his claim to lands and titles, his right to marry or father children. He becomes a sword in the darkness, a watcher on the walls, a fire that burns against the cold. He pledges his life to the realm, to stand against whatever comes from the north. These were not easy vows, even in the beginning. Men gave up everything to join the watch. But in those first generations, they did so gladly. The memory of the long night was still fresh. Fathers told their sons about the darkness and the cold. Grandfathers bore scars from fighting the dead. Everyone understood that the Night's Watch was necessary. Everyone knew that someone had to stand guard. And so the best men of the North took the black, seeing it as an honor rather than a punishment. The Watch built more castles along the wall. East Watch by the Sea rose on the eastern shore, where the wall meets the Bay of Seals. From there, the brothers could watch the sea for threats, because the others could cross water just as easily as land. Deep Lake was built to guard the section of the wall near the mountain lake it was named for. Queensgate and Snowgate and Icemark and a dozen others followed, each positioned to cover a section of the wall, each manned by brothers ready to light the warning fires if danger approached. At its height, the Night's Watch manned 19 castles along the wall, 19 fortresses, each with its own garrison, its own stables, its own supply of weapons and food. Communication between the castles was maintained by signal fires and ranger patrols. If one castle spotted trouble, it would light its beacon, and the next castle would light its own, and so on down the wall, until every garrison knew danger was coming. This system allowed a few thousand men to defend 100 leagues of wall. But the castles were not just military posts. They were communities. The brothers lived there year-round, through summers that could last decades and winters that seemed to last forever. They trained together. They ate together. They stood watch together. They became closer than brothers by blood, bound by their shared duty and their shared isolation. The outside world went on without them. Kings rose and fell. Dynasties began and ended. Wars were fought and peace was made. But the Night's Watch endured, unchanged, focused only on its eternal mission. The magic woven into the wall helped protect these early brothers. Some say the spells prevent the others from crossing. Others claim the wall itself would collapse if the ancient magic failed. The children of the forest played a role in these enchantments, though the details have been lost. The giants, if they truly helped build the wall, may have contributed their own strange power to the construction. The old gods watched from the weirwoods, their faces carved into the pale bark, their red eyes seeing everything. The truth is that no one living today fully understands how the wall works. The masters can measure its height and calculate its volume of ice. They can study its construction and marvel at its engineering, but they cannot explain why it has not melted. They cannot account for the cold that radiates from it, even in summer. They cannot dismiss the reports from brothers who have served on the wall, reports of strange sounds in the ice, of voices calling from within, of a presence that seems to permeate the entire structure. Brandon the Builder is long dead, his bones dust, his knowledge lost. The children of the forest have retreated into legend. The giants are gone, if they ever existed. The old magic has faded from the world, replaced by the steel and strategy of human warfare. And yet the wall remains. It stands as it stood 8,000 years ago, defying time and nature, fulfilling the purpose for which it was created. The early years of the Night's Watch were its golden age. The order was filled with volunteers, second sons of noble houses, who saw service on the wall as honorable. The watch was well supplied and well respected. When a brother of the Night's Watch traveled south, he was welcomed with honor. Lords gave him shelter and food. Small folk brought him gifts. Everyone understood that the Black Brothers were protecting the realm, standing watch against horrors that most people could barely imagine. Brandon's gift ensured that the watch had the resources it needed. The lands of the gift were settled by farmers who paid their taxes to the Night's Watch instead of to local lords. These taxes provided food, clothing, weapons, and all the other necessities of life on the wall. The watch was independent, answering to no king or lord, taking orders from no one but the Lord Commander elected by the brothers themselves. This independence was crucial. Brandon understood that the watch needed to remain above the politics of the realm. If the watch became a tool of kings, it would be used to fight human wars instead of watching for inhuman threats. If great houses could command the watch, they would use it to settle their feuds and advance their ambitions. The Night's Watch had to stand apart, neutral, focused only on its mission. And for thousands of years, it did exactly that. But good intentions would not be enough to protect the watch from itself. The greatest threat to the Night's Watch would not come from beyond the wall. It would come from within, from a brother who would nearly destroy everything the watch was meant to protect. His name, like so much else from those ancient days, has been lost to time, but his title remains, spoken in whispers, remembered in fear, the Night's King. And his story begins where Brandon's ends, in the cold halls of the Night Fort, where the darkness was waiting. The 13th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch did not just break his vows. He nearly destroyed everything the watch was meant to protect. His story is one of the darkest chapters in the long history of the Black Brothers, a tale of corruption and horror that the watch itself tried to erase from memory. But some stories refuse to die, no matter how deeply they are buried. The Night's King rose to command during the Age of Heroes, though the exact date has been lost to time. Some Meisters place his reign 2,000 years after the founding of the watch. Others suggest it was much sooner, perhaps only a few generations after Brandon the Builder raised the wall. What we know with certainty is this: he was a warrior of the Night's Watch, a man who had taken the black and sworn the sacred vows. He was considered brave and skilled enough to be chosen as Lord Commander by his brothers. And then something happened that changed him forever. The story begins with a ranging beyond the wall. The Lord Commander led his men into the haunted forest, as commanders had done 1,000 times before. They were searching for wildlings, or perhaps investigating reports of strange activity in the far north. The details vary depending on which version of the tale you hear, but all versions agree on what happened next. He saw a woman. She appeared in the darkness, pale as the moon, with skin like ice and eyes as blue as the coldest winter sky. The moment he looked upon her, he was lost. Old Nan tells the story this way: he gave her his seed, and she gave him his soul. The language is crude, but it captures the essential truth. Whatever happened between them, it transformed the Lord Commander into something that was no longer entirely human. He brought her back to the Night Fort. This alone was a breaking of his vows. The brothers of the Night's Watch swear to take no wife, to father no children, to love no woman above their duty. But the Lord Commander did not seem to care about his vows anymore. He took the woman as his bride. He declared himself not just Lord Commander, but King, the Night's King, and the woman with the blue eyes became his queen. For 13 years, the Night's King ruled from the Night Fort. 13 years of darkness and horror. He turned the Black Brothers into something twisted and evil. He made them give sacrifices to the others. The old stories speak of terrible things done in those halls, of rituals performed in the cold darkness, of screams that echoed from the towers. The brothers who served under him were no longer protectors of the realm. They had become servants of the very thing they were sworn to fight. The Night's King's pale queen was not human, though what exactly she was remains a matter of debate and speculation. Some readers of these old tales believe she was a female other, one of the White Walkers themselves. The blue eyes, the ice-cold skin, the power she held over the Lord Commander, all of these details support this theory. Others suggest she might have been a woman of the night, transformed by the other's magic. Still others claim she was something else entirely, a creature from the land of always winter that had never been seen before or since. What is certain is that her influence corrupted everything she touched. The Night's King worshipped her as a goddess. He made his brothers worship her as well. Those who refused were killed, or worse. The exact nature of the sacrifices offered to the others is not recorded in any reliable history, but the implications are dark enough. Some whisper that the Night's King gave the others what they wanted most: warm, living humans to transform into their cold servants. The Night Fort became a place of evil during these 13 years. No travelers came near it. Rangers who ventured too close did not return. The other castles along the wall knew something was wrong, but the Night's King had consolidated his power carefully. He controlled the largest garrison. He had turned the strongest brothers to his service. Any who opposed him died quickly. The Watch, which had been founded to protect the realm, had become its greatest threat. But the Night's King made a crucial mistake. He forgot that the Night's Watch did not stand alone in the north. The kings of winter still ruled from Winterfell. The Stark of that age, whose name has also been lost, but who may have been another Brandon, learn what was happening at the Night Fort. The stories say a brother of the Night's Watch escaped and brought word south. He told the King of Winter about the horrors unfolding on the wall, about the Night's King and his pale queen, about the corruption of the sacred order. The King of Winter gathered his strength, but he understood that even the might of Winterfell might not be enough to break the Night's King's power. So he did something remarkable. He sent word beyond the wall, to the wildlings, to the king beyond the wall. He proposed an alliance, a joining of forces between the sworn enemies of the north. The wildlings and the kneelers would march together for this one time to destroy a threat that endangered them all. The king beyond the wall agreed. Whatever else separated the free folk from the kingdoms of men, they understood that the Night's King served the others, and the wildlings feared the others more than they hated the crows. An army gathered, drawn from both sides of the wall. Stark warriors marched north alongside wildling raiders. Men who would normally kill each other on sight stood shoulder to shoulder, united by their common enemy. The siege of the Night Fort must have been terrible. The Night's King had turned the Watch's greatest fortress into his stronghold. The walls were thick. The garrison was loyal to him, corrupted by his dark magic. The Pale Queen's power protected him, but the allied army was determined. They surrounded the Night Fort. They cut off its supplies. They launched assault after assault against its walls. The battle's details have not survived the passage of 8,000 years. We do not know how long the siege lasted. We do not know how many died on both sides. The stories skip over the fighting and jump straight to the ending. The Night's King was defeated. The Night Fort was taken. The Pale Queen was destroyed, though how this was accomplished is never explained. Perhaps she was killed with dragonglass. Perhaps she simply vanished when her power was broken. Perhaps she fled back to the land of always winter. The Night King himself was cast down from his throne. What happened to him after his defeat is subject to conflicting accounts. Some tales say he was executed immediately, his body burned to prevent him from rising again. Others claim he was imprisoned in a cell deep beneath the Night Fort, locked away where he could never again threaten the Watch. Still others whisper that he was given to the old gods, bound to a weirwood tree, and left to die slowly as his blood fed the roots. What is absolutely certain is what happened next. The King of Winter and the King beyond the Wall made a decision together. They ordered that all records of the Night's King be destroyed. His true name was struck from every book and scroll. The histories were rewritten to remove any mention of who he had been before his corruption. Even the number of the Lord Commander who came after him was changed, so that there would be no obvious gap in the succession. Why did they do this? Why erase the Night's King so completely that even his name was lost? The most common explanation is that they wanted to prevent him from being remembered as anything other than a cautionary tale. If his true identity was known, if people learned which great house he came from, it might dishonor that house forever. Or perhaps they feared that knowledge of his true name might give him power, even in death. The old magic worked through names and blood. Forgetting him completely might be the only way to ensure he could never return. But they could not erase the memory of what he did. The Night's King remained in the songs and stories. A monster used to frighten children and remind the brothers of the Watch about the danger of breaking their vows. Old Nan tells his tale to scare young lordlings in Winterfell. The Black Brothers whisper about him during the long watches, when the wind howls and the wall creaks and groans in the cold. The Night's King has become a legend, and legends are harder to kill than men. Some readers and students of history have noticed interesting details in these old stories. They wonder if the Night's King might have been a Stark himself. The tale mentions that he was a warrior of the Night's Watch, which would fit, as many Starks have taken the Black over the millennia. Old Nan claims that he was the brother of the King of Winter who defeated him, which would make him a Stark prince. The name itself, the Night's King, echoes the title of the Kings of Winter who ruled from Winterfell. But these are theories, not facts. The masters are divided on the question. Some believe the Night's King was indeed a Stark, which would explain why his name was so thoroughly erased. The shame of having a family member become the most evil Lord Commander in history would be too great to bear. Others argue that the story has been distorted over time and that the Night's King could have been from any northern house or no house at all. Without solid historical evidence, we cannot say for certain. What we can say is that the Night's King's reign left scars on the Night's Watch that never fully healed. The Night Fort itself became a place of ill omen. Even after it was cleansed and reconsecrated to the old gods, brothers assigned there reported strange occurrences. They heard sounds in the walls. They saw shadows move where no one walked. The deeper levels of the fortress, where the Night's King had performed his darkest rituals, were eventually sealed off completely. No one wanted to explore those black corridors and discover what might still linger there. The story also revealed a fundamental weakness in the Night's Watch. The Order depends entirely on the honor and integrity of its brothers. If a Lord Commander goes bad, if he turns the Watch to evil purposes, there is no higher authority to stop him. The Watch is independent by design, answering to no king or lord. This independence is its greatest strength, but it is also a vulnerability. The Night's King nearly destroyed the Watch from within because no one had the authority to check his power until outside forces intervened. After the Night's King's fall, the Watch implemented new traditions to prevent such a thing from happening again. The Lord Commander's power was limited in certain ways. The other officers, the First Ranger, and the First Builder, and the First Steward, gained more authority to balance against the Commander. The brothers were encouraged to remain vigilant, not just against external threats, but against corruption within their own ranks. And the story of the Night's King was preserved despite the erasure of his name as a warning to future generations. The alliance between the King of Winter and the King beyond the Wall did not last beyond the defeat of the Night's King. Once their common enemy was destroyed, the old enmities reasserted themselves. The Wildlings returned beyond the Wall. The Starks returned to Winterfell. The Night's Watch went back to its duty of keeping the two groups separated. The brief moment of cooperation was forgotten, or at least set aside, as the natural order of things resumed. But perhaps something was learned from that temporary alliance. Perhaps both sides realized that there are threats greater than their mutual hatred. Perhaps they understood, at least for a moment, that the real enemy has always been the cold and the dark, not each other. This lesson would be forgotten and relearned many times over the following millennia, usually at great cost. The Night's King was gone, but the scars he left would shape the Watch forever. The Night Fort's reputation never recovered. The brothers stationed there served their time with dread, counting the days until they could transfer to another castle. Strange stories continued to emerge from its halls. Tales of cold hands touching men in the darkness, of voices calling names from empty rooms, of a massive stone well in the base of the fortress that seemed to descend into infinite blackness. Centuries later, the Night's Watch would abandon the Night Fort entirely, moving the Lord Commander's seat to Castle Black. They would seal its gates and leave it to the wind and snow. But even empty, even abandoned, the Night Fort remained a place of power and dread. Some claimed that the Night's King spirit still walked its halls. Others whispered that his pale queen waited in the depths, frozen but not dead, patient through the centuries. These are stories, of course, legends and superstitions born from long winters and too much darkness. But then again, the Night's King himself was supposed to be just a story, a legend told to frighten children and remind brothers of their duty. And yet, the histories confirm that he was real. He ruled. He corrupted the Watch. He nearly destroyed everything. If the Night's King was real, if such horrors could happen once, they could happen again. This truth haunted the Night's Watch for thousands of years. It made them careful. It made them vigilant. It made them remember that the greatest threats sometimes come from within, and that eternal vigilance means watching not just the lands beyond the wall, but each other as well. The 13th Lord Commander had nearly ended the Night's Watch before its purpose was truly tested. But the Watch survived. It endured. It learned from its darkest hour and grew stronger, at least for a time. The centuries that followed would bring new challenges and new threats. The Watch would face them all, standing guard as it always had, as it always would. For thousands of years, the Night's Watch stood as the shield that guards the realms of men. But each age brought new threats, new failures, and new heroes. For thousands of years, the Night's Watch stood as the shield that guards the realms of men. But each age brought new threats, new failures, and new heroes. The centuries rolled past like waves against a shore, each one wearing away a little more of what the Watch had once been. Kings rose and fell in the south. Dynasties began and ended. But the wall remained, and the brothers in black continued their vigil, even as the world slowly forgot why that vigil mattered. The age of heroes gave way to new ages, each with its own character and challenges. The first men still ruled Westeros, worshipping the old gods and maintaining the traditions of their ancestors. The Night's Watch during this period was still strong, still respected, still filled with men who understood the true purpose of their vows. The memory of the long night had faded somewhat, becoming more legend than lived experience. But the North remembered. The Starks remembered, and the Watch remained vigilant. Then came the Andals. 6,000 years after the long night, 2,000 years after the Night's King's fall, a new people crossed the narrow sea. They brought steel weapons and the faith of the Seven. They brought new customs and new ways of war, and they brought conquest. The Andal invasion transformed the southern kingdoms of Westeros, sweeping away the First Men's rule everywhere except in the north and the Iron Islands. The Night's Watch watched this transformation with concern. The Andals had no connection to the old gods. They had not lived through the long night. Their histories and legends spoke of the Seven, not of the others, and the darkness beyond the wall. Would these new people understand the importance of the Watch? Would they continue to support the Black Brothers, or would they see the wall as a relic of a barbaric past? The Andals never conquered the North. The Kings of Winter, the Starks in Winterfell, held their lands against wave after wave of invaders. The moat was built and held. The neck proved impassable to southern armies. The North remained a kingdom of the First Men, and with it, the Night's Watch retained its strongest supporters. But the southern kingdoms fell one by one to Andal steel and Andal faith. This created a new dynamic for the Night's Watch. The southern lords who now ruled the Vale, the Riverlands, the Stormlands, and the other kingdoms had no ancestral memory of the long night. To them, the Night's Watch was a strange northern institution, manned by criminals and broken men, guarding against threats that seemed more myth than reality. Support from the south began to decline. Fewer southern nobles sent their sons to take the Black. Fewer supplies made the long journey north. The Watch became more dependent on the north, on the gift, on its own resources. Yet the Watch endured. It adapted. Andal knights who had committed crimes or dishonored their houses began taking the Black instead of facing execution or exile. These men brought new fighting techniques, new strategies, new perspectives. The Watch absorbed them, as it had absorbed everyone who came to the wall. Black Brothers came to include men of both the First Men and the Andals, worshippers of the old gods and the Seven. all united by their vows and their duty. The centuries that followed the Andal invasion were marked by a slow, steady decline in the Watcher's strength, but also by moments of greatness. Individual Lord Commanders rose to meet the challenges of their times, strengthening the Watch through force of will and wisdom. Rangers ventured far beyond the Wall, mapping the haunted forests and the lands of always winter. Builders maintained the Wall and the castles, ensuring that the Great Barrier remained strong despite the passage of time. One of the most famous commanders of this era was Lord Commander Osric Stark, who served approximately 4,000 years before Aegon's conquest. Osric was a younger son of the King of Winter, and he brought northern steel and northern resolve to the Watch. Under his command, the Watch launched a series of massive rangings beyond the Wall, pushing deep into wildling territory and establishing a presence in lands that had not seen Black Brothers in generations. Osric understood that the Watch could not simply hide behind the Wall. The brothers needed to know what was happening in the far north. They needed to maintain contact with the lands beyond, to watch for any signs that the others might be stirring again. His rangings brought back valuable intelligence about wildling movements, about the state of the haunted forest, about the abandoned villages and strange ruins that dotted the landscape north of the Wall. But Osric's greatest contribution was not military. He implemented reforms in how the Watch recruited and trained its brothers. He established formal training programs for rangers, builders, and stewards. He created a system where experienced brothers would teach new recruits, passing down knowledge and skills that might otherwise be lost. He also worked to improve relations between the Watch and the northern houses, ensuring a steady flow of supplies and volunteers. Other commanders were less successful. Lord Commander Runsel Hightower, who led the Watch approximately 3,000 years before Aegon's conquest, was a southerner who never truly understood the North or the Watch's mission. He came from one of the great houses of the Reach, and he brought southern attitudes with him. Runsel believed the Watch should be more involved in the politics of the realm, that it should take sides in disputes between kingdoms, that it could use its reputation and position for political gain. His brothers rejected this vision. The Night's Watch had remained neutral in the wars of kings for thousands of years. That neutrality was sacred, essential to the Watch's purpose. When Runsel tried to forge an alliance between the Watch and the Reach against the Stormlands, his own officers confronted him. They reminded him that the Watch takes no part in the affairs of the realm. They warned him that breaking this tradition would destroy the Watch's independence. Runsel refused to listen. He continued his political schemes, sending messages to southern lords, offering the Watch's support in exchange for gold and supplies. The situation came to a head when the first ranger, a grizzled veteran named Yoren of the Flints, called for Runsel's removal. The brothers voted, as was their right, and Runsel was stripped of his command. He was given a choice: take up duties as a common ranger and serve in silence, or face execution for betraying his vows. Runsel chose to serve, and he died on a ranging beyond the Wall 2 years later, killed by wildlings who cared nothing for his southern schemes. The Watch learned from Runsel's failure. Future Lord Commanders were chosen more carefully. The brothers looked for men who understood the Wall's purpose, who respected the old traditions, who who would not be swayed by southern gold or southern promises. The Watch became even more isolated from the politics of the realm, which in some ways weakened it, but also preserved its integrity. Wildling raids became more frequent as the centuries passed. The free folk beyond the wall had grown numerous and bold. They raided south of the wall, attacking villages in the Gift, stealing supplies, and sometimes trying to force their way through the wall itself. The Night's Watch responded with rangings and patrols, hunting down raiders and driving them back into the wilderness. But the wildlings were not the true enemy. They were a nuisance, a danger to the small folk, but they were still human. They could be fought with normal weapons. They could be reasoned with, sometimes. They were not the others. The Black Brothers knew this, even if the rest of the realm had forgotten. Every resource spent fighting wildlings was a resource that could not be used preparing for the real threat, the one that waited in the frozen north, patient and immortal. Some Lord Commanders tried to find a balance. They defended against wildling raids while also maintaining the primary mission of watching for the others. They sent rangers far north, beyond the territories where wildlings lived, into the empty lands where nothing grew and nothing lived except the cold. These rangers rarely returned, and those who did brought back troubling reports. They spoke of strange sounds in the night, of ruins that seemed to move when you were not looking directly at them, of cold that had nothing to do with the weather. Around 2,000 years before Aegon's conquest, the Watch fought what became known as the War of the 100 Kings. This was not actually a single war, but a period of intense conflict as dozens of petty kingdoms in the north fought each other for dominance. The Starks emerged victorious, consolidating their control over the entire north, but the fighting lasted for generations and drew resources away from the wall. During this period, the Watch struggled to maintain its strength. Younger sons who might have taken the Black were needed to fight in their father's wars. Supplies that might have gone north to the wall were consumed by armies in the field. The Gift was raided repeatedly by various factions, reducing its productivity. The Watch had to rely more heavily on its own resources, on hunting and fishing, and the limited agriculture that could be sustained in the far north. Yet even during this difficult time, the Watch produced heroes. Lord Commander Demon of House Mallister led a successful defense against a massive wildling invasion. Thousands of free folk, united under a king beyond the wall named Gendel, tried to circumvent the wall by using caves that ran beneath it. Gendel's host emerged south of the wall and began raiding deep into the Gift. Demon responded with swift and brutal efficiency. He tracked Gendel's forces and engaged them in a series of running battles. The fighting was fierce. Gendel was a cunning commander, and his warriors were desperate. They had burned their bridges by coming south. They could not retreat back through the caves, which the Watch had discovered and sealed. They had to fight or die. The final battle took place near Long Lake. Demon's forces surrounded Gendel's host and destroyed them almost to the last man. Gendel himself died in the fighting, struck down by a Black Brother whose name has not survived the centuries. The wildling invasion was ended, but at terrible cost. Nearly a third of the Night's Watch's strength died in that campaign. It took decades for the Watch to recover its numbers. These patterns repeated throughout the centuries. A strong Lord Commander would build up the Watch's strength, improve its capabilities, launch ambitious rangings or construction projects. Then his successor would be weak or unlucky, or would face challenges beyond his ability to handle. The Watch would decline again. Resources would be lost. Brothers would die. Castles would be abandoned, as the Watch no longer had men to garrison them. By the time the Targaryen dragons first appeared in Westeros, the Night's Watch was already a shadow of what it once was. Of the 19 castles that once stood fully manned along the wall, only 9 still had garrisons. The rest stood empty, their gates sealed, their towers crumbling. The Watch's total strength had fallen to perhaps 3,000 men, down from the 10,000 or more it had boasted in the years after its founding. But 3,000 men still seemed like a substantial force to the Southern Lords, who knew nothing of the Wall's true purpose. They saw the Night's Watch as a place to send criminals and troublemakers, a dumping ground for unwanted sons and broken men. The honor of taking the Black had faded in most of the realm. Only in the north did the old traditions hold strong, and even there, fewer and fewer nobles chose to join the Watch voluntarily. The Watch's relationship with the wildlings also evolved over these thousands of years. In the early days, there had been less distinction between the people north and south of the Wall. They were all first men, all worshipping the old gods, all connected by blood and culture. The Wall divided them, but not completely. Trade occurred. Treaties were negotiated. Sometimes the free folk would send their criminals to the Wall to take the Black, just as the southern kingdoms did. Over time, this changed. The wildlings north of the Wall developed their own culture, their own way of life that rejected the laws and customs of the 7 kingdoms. They called themselves the Free Folk and saw everyone south of the Wall as kneelers, slaves to lords and kings. The people of the north began to see the wildlings as savages, as raiders and thieves who could not be trusted. The divide deepened until warfare became the default relationship between the Watch and the Free Folk. Yet some brothers still understood that wildlings were not the enemy. They were humans, trying to survive in a harsh land, dealing with threats the Southerners could not imagine. A few Lord Commanders attempted to negotiate with wildling leaders to establish agreements that might reduce the constant raiding and warfare. Some of these efforts succeeded, at least temporarily. Others failed spectacularly, ending in betrayal and bloodshed. One particularly notable example was Lord Commander Corlys Penny, who served roughly 1,500 years before Aegon's conquest. Corlys believed the Watch was wasting resources fighting wildlings when it should be preparing for the others' return. He proposed a radical solution: allow the free folk to settle south of the Wall in the Gift, in exchange for their service in defending against the true enemy from the far north. The idea had merit. The wildlings were tough fighters, accustomed to the cold and the wilderness. They knew the lands beyond the Wall better than any ranger. With proper organization and leadership, they could significantly strengthen the Watch's capabilities. But Corlys's proposal met fierce resistance from both his own brothers and from the northern lords. The Starks in Winterfell rejected the plan outright. The idea of wildlings settling in the Gift on land that belonged to the Watch but was still considered part of the North was unacceptable. Corlys pressed forward anyway. He negotiated with a wildling chief named Bale, and allowed a group of free folk to settle near the night fort. For a brief time, the experiment seemed to work. The wildlings helped patrol the wall. They shared their knowledge of the lands beyond. They even fought alongside black brothers against other wildlings who continued raiding. But it did not last. Cultural differences proved too great. The free folk refused to follow the Watch's discipline and structure. They raided small folk in the gift, claiming they were only taking what they needed. Violence broke out between wildling settlers and the Watch. Eventually, Corlys was forced to drive the wildlings back beyond the wall. His experiment had failed, and it would be over 1,000 years before another Lord Commander would try something similar. As the centuries passed and the Watch declined, certain traditions became more important. The vows became more sacred, more central to the identity of a black brother. The titles and ranks within the Watch were codified and formalized. The election process for Lord Commander became an elaborate ritual, with each vote counted carefully, with politics and allegiances playing out in the choosing of the Watch's leader. The Watch also developed a culture all its own, separate from both the North and the South. Black brothers came from every kingdom in Westeros, from every social class, from every background. On the wall, none of that mattered. A knight and a peasant wore the same black cloak. A lord's son and a thief ate the same food and stood the same watches. The Watch truly became a brotherhood, bound by something deeper than blood or birth. This brotherhood was both the Watch's greatest strength and a source of potential weakness. When brothers trusted each other absolutely, when they fought as one, the Watch could accomplish remarkable things. But when that trust broke down, when brothers turned against each other, the results could be catastrophic. The memory of the Night's King served as a constant reminder of what could happen when the Brotherhood failed. By the time Aegon, the Conqueror's dragons, burned their way across Westeros, the Night's Watch had survived for over 8,000 years. It had faced invasions and betrayals, decline and renewal, heroes and villains. It had adapted to the changing world while maintaining its core mission. And though it was weaker than it had ever been, though the realm had largely forgotten the true reason for its existence, the Watch still stood. Brothers still took the vows. Swords still guarded the realms of men. The wall still rose 800 feet into the northern sky, ice and magic holding back the darkness. The dragons conquered the 7 kingdoms, but they could not stop the slow death of the Night's Watch. The dragons conquered the 7 kingdoms, but they could not stop the slow death of the Night's Watch. When Aegon the Conqueror landed at the mouth of the Blackwater with his sister wives and their 3 dragons, he changed the face of Westeros forever. 6 of the 7 kingdoms bent the knee. The Iron Throne was forged from the swords of defeated enemies. A new dynasty began, one that would rule for nearly 300 years. But in all that time, with all that power, the Targaryens could not restore the Night's Watch to its former glory. Aegon himself never visited the wall. He conquered the north not through dragonfire, but through negotiation. Torrhen Stark, the King of Winter, bent the knee rather than see his people burned. In exchange, the Starks remained wardens of the north, keeping their ancestral seat at Winterfell and their authority over the northern lords. The Night's Watch fell under the protection of the Iron Throne, but in practical terms, little changed. The watch still depended on the north for most of its support. The southern kingdoms still saw it as a distant, irrelevant institution. The early Targaryen kings sent token support to the wall. They understood, at least in theory, that the watch served the entire realm. Royal decrees reminded the lords of Westeros of their duty to supply the Black Brothers with men, food, and equipment. But these decrees were rarely enforced. The watch received some aid, but never enough. The decline that had begun centuries earlier continued, slowly and inexorably. Then came Queen Alysanne. Good Queen Alysanne, sister wife to King Jaehaerys, the Conciliator. In the year 58 after conquest, she travelled north with her dragon Silverwing. She had heard tales of the wall and wanted to see it with her own eyes. What she found disturbed her deeply. The Night's Watch was struggling, undermanned and undersupplied, forgotten by the realm it protected. Queen Alysanne stayed at the wall for more than 2 weeks. She flew Silverwing along its entire length, from Castle Black to Eastwatch by the sea, and back again. She spoke with the Lord Commander and the other officers. She listened to the brothers' stories and concerns. She saw the empty castles, the crumbling walls, the desperate shortage of everything the watch needed to function, and she was moved by what she saw. The Queen tried to fly Silverwing beyond the wall, into the haunted forest and the lands of always winter. She wanted to see what the watch was guarding against, but Silverwing refused. The dragon would not cross the wall, no matter how much Alysanne urged her. The beast grew agitated, shrieking and clawing at the ice. Some force in the wall itself, some ancient magic woven into its construction, repelled the dragon. Alysanne was forced to turn back, shaken by her mount's fear. When she returned south, Queen Alysanne became the Night's Watch's greatest advocate at court. She convinced King Jaehaerys to double the size of the gift, adding another 50 leagues of land south of the original territory. This new gift provided more farms, more villages, more resources for the watch. It was the most significant royal support the Black Brothers had received in living memory. Alysanne also established the practice of sending captured criminals north to the wall rather than executing them or enslaving them. This increased the watch's numbers, though the quality of recruits declined. Murderers, rapists, thieves, and poachers now made up the majority of new brothers. The days when noble volunteers formed the core of the watch were long gone. The Black Brothers were becoming what they are today, a penal colony, a dumping ground for society's unwanted and dangerous men. The Queen's support helped, but it was not enough to reverse the watch's decline. Even with the new gift, even with more criminals sent north to take the Black, the watch continued to weaken. The fundamental problem was that the realm no longer believed in the watch's mission. The others were legends, stories told to frighten children. The Long Night was ancient history, so old that it might as well be mythology. Why should the kingdoms support an expensive military order to guard against threats that no one believed existed? The move from the Night Fort to Castle Black happened during the Targaryen era, though the exact date is uncertain. Most Meisters place it around 150 AC, roughly a century after Alysanne's visit. The Night Fort had served as the Watch's headquarters for thousands of years, but it had also grown dark and terrible. The brothers stationed there hated the place. They reported strange sounds and stranger sights. the deep levels were sealed off. But sometimes men heard things moving down there, in the darkness beneath the castle. Lord Commander Raven's Teeth, whose real name has been lost, but who earned his nickname for his brutal efficiency, made the decision to abandon the Night Fort. It was too large, too expensive to maintain, too filled with dark memories. Castle Black was smaller, more manageable, and had none of the Night Fort's haunted reputation. The move was practical, but it also symbolized the Watch's diminished state. Once, the Watch had been strong enough to hold the largest castle on the wall. Now it huddled in a smaller fortress, trying to maintain even a fraction of its former capability. The Night Fort's gates were sealed with ice and stone. The castle was abandoned to the wind and the cold. Some brothers claimed they were glad to leave it behind. Others whispered that leaving the Night Fort was a mistake, that the ancient fortress held secrets and powers that Castle Black lacked. Either way, the move was made, and Castle Black became the new headquarters of the Night's Watch. During the Targaryen era, the Watch produced several notable Lord Commanders, though none achieved the legendary status of the heroes from the Age of Heroes. Lord Commander Osmond Harkley served for nearly 30 years in the early 2nd century AC. He was a competent administrator who managed the Watch's resources carefully and maintained good relations with Winterfell. His tenure was marked by relative peace and stability, though no great achievements. In contrast, Lord Commander Corgil, who led the Watch in the late 2nd century AC, was a disaster. He came from Dawn and never adapted to the cold or the culture of the North. He alienated the Northern lords with his arrogance and his Southern ways. He made poor tactical decisions that got good men killed on rangings. He tried to implement reforms that the brothers rejected as foolish and impractical. His command was marked by low morale, high desertion rates, and a general sense that the Watch was falling apart. Corgil's failures led to increased scrutiny of how Lord Commanders were chosen. The brothers began to favor northern candidates, men who understood the Wall and its mission, who respected the old traditions. This was practical, but it also further alienated the Watch from the southern kingdoms. If the Watch was seen as a northern institution, led by northern men, why should southern lords support it? The Dance of the Dragons, the civil war that tore the Targaryen dynasty apart in the middle of the 2nd century AC, had little direct impact on the Wall. The Night's Watch maintained its neutrality, refusing to take sides in the conflict between Rhaenyra and Aegon II. Some individual brothers had opinions and preferences, but the Watch as an institution stayed out of the war. This was wise. Getting involved in the succession crisis would have destroyed the Watch's independence and likely led to its dissolution. However, the war's aftermath hurt the Watch significantly. The realm was devastated. Dragons were dead or dying. The Targaryen dynasty was weakened. Resources that might have gone to the Wall were consumed in rebuilding the kingdom. The southern lords had their own problems and little interest in supporting a distant military order. For decades after the dance, the Watch received almost nothing from the south. Only the north, loyal as always, continued to send supplies and recruits. The Blackfire Rebellions, a series of civil wars fought over Targaryen succession in the first half of the 3rd century AC, similarly ignored the Wall. These conflicts consumed the realm's attention and resources. Noble houses chose sides and fought each other with passion and fury. Thousands died in battles that had nothing to do with defending the realm against external threats. And through it all, the Night's Watch stood on the wall, watching and waiting, forgotten by almost everyone except the Starks. Some defeated Blackfyre supporters were sent to the wall after the rebellions. These were often skilled warriors, trained knights who had fought in real battles. In theory, they should have strengthened the Watch. In practice, many of them were bitter and resentful. They had fought for what they believed was the legitimate king, and now they were condemned to spend the rest of their lives freezing on a wall, guarding against enemies that no one believed existed. Their morale was poor, and they often caused trouble within the Watch. Yet a few of these forced recruits became good brothers. They adapted to their new life. They found purpose in the Watch's mission. They trained younger brothers and led rangings beyond the wall. One such man was Sir Roderick Rivers, a bastard son of a Blackfyre supporter who eventually became First Ranger and led some of the most successful expeditions into wildling territory in the late 3rd century AC. The relationship between the Watch and the wildlings continued to deteriorate during the Targaryen era. The free folk grew more numerous and more organized. They launched larger and more frequent raids south of the wall. The Watch responded with rangings and punitive expeditions, but these were expensive and dangerous. Brothers died on almost every ranging. The wildlings learned the Watch's tactics and adapted, becoming harder to catch and harder to defeat. Several times during this period, a king beyond the wall arose and united the free folk. These were dangerous moments. A unified wildling army could number in the tens of thousands, far outnumbering the Watch. If such an army found a way through the wall or over it, the North would face a devastating invasion. The Watch had to take these threats seriously, even when the Southern Lords dismissed them as irrelevant squabbles in a frozen wasteland. One of the most significant wildling threats came around 230 AC, when a king beyond the wall named Raymond Redbeard led an army through the wall. They found a way over the mountains at the western end, bypassing the wall entirely. Raymond's host poured into the north, raiding and pillaging as they went. The Night's Watch was caught unprepared. They had been watching the wall, not the mountains. The Starks responded with their usual efficiency. The king in the north at that time, whose name is not recorded, but who may have been a Lord Eddard or Brandon, gathered his forces and marched to intercept the wildlings. The two armies met at a lake in the north. The battle was fierce and bloody. Raymond Redbeard himself was killed, and his host was destroyed. But the fact that wildlings had gotten so far south of the wall was deeply troubling. The Watch learned from this failure. They began patrolling the mountains more carefully, watching for any signs that wildlings might try to circumvent the wall again. They also improved their communication with Winterfell, establishing protocols for how to respond if another such invasion occurred. But the underlying problem remained. The Watch did not have enough men to properly defend the entire length of the wall and all the possible routes around it. By the end of the Targaryen dynasty, the Night's Watch was in desperate shape. The Summerhall tragedy in 259 AC, which killed King Aegon V and several members of the royal family, was followed by decades of political instability. Robert's rebellion in 283 AC overthrew the Targaryens entirely. Through all this chaos, the Watch continued to decline. More castles were abandoned. The total number of brothers fell below 1,000 for the first time in recorded history. The Watch's reputation also suffered during this period. Stories spread throughout the realm about the kind of men who wore the black. They were criminals and cowards, failures and broken men who wanted to send their son to serve alongside murderers and rapists. What honor was there in taking an oath with thieves and deserters? The romantic notion of the Night's Watch as a brotherhood of heroes had been replaced by the reality of a penal colony. The wildlings remained a constant problem during this period. The free folk north of the Wall were more numerous and better organized than they had been in living memory. Various chiefs and petty kings ruled different tribes, and these leaders regularly launched raids south of the Wall. The Night's Watch responded as best it could, sending out patrols and rangings to track down raiders and drive them back. But with fewer than 1,000 men defending 100 leagues of wall, the task was nearly impossible. Then, Mance Rayder deserted. This event would prove to be one of the most significant in the Watch's recent history, though no one realized it at the time. Mance had been a ranger, one of the best the Watch had. He was skilled with weapons, brave in battle, and knowledgeable about the lands beyond the Wall. He had served the Watch faithfully for years, but something changed in him during a ranging. The exact details are unclear, but Mance became disillusioned with the Watch and its rules. He saw the free folk living without kings or lords, and he wanted that freedom for himself. Mance climbed the wall one night and disappeared into the wilderness beyond. The Watch sent rangers after him, but he evaded capture. He had lived beyond the wall for years. He knew the territory better than almost anyone. He vanished into the haunted forest and was presumed lost. Desertion was not uncommon in the Night's Watch, though it was always punished by death when deserters were caught. But Mance was different. He did not desert to return to civilization. He deserted to join the wildlings. What happened next changed everything. Mance did not simply join a wildling tribe. He united them. This had been tried before by various kings beyond the Wall, but none had succeeded as completely as Mance Rayder did. He was intelligent, charismatic, and he understood both the free folk and the Night's Watch. He knew how the Watch operated, what its weaknesses were, how to exploit them. He knew the wildlings' strengths and how to organize them into an effective force. Over the years following his desertion, Mance brought tribe after tribe under his command. He negotiated with some, fought with others, married into important families, and slowly built a coalition of free folk that had never been seen before. The wildlings called him the King Beyond the Wall, though Mance himself claimed he was not a king, merely a leader chosen by free people. By the late 290 AC, Mance commanded an army that numbered in the tens of thousands. This was the largest wildling host assembled in living memory, perhaps the largest since Raymond Redbeard's invasion centuries earlier. The Night's Watch knew something was happening beyond the Wall. Rangers reported increased wildling activity. Entire villages north of the Wall were being abandoned, their inhabitants moving south towards the Wall. The free folk were gathering, organizing, preparing for something. But what? Were they planning an invasion? Were they fleeing from something? The Watch sent rangings to investigate. But many of these expeditions did not return. Those that did came back with troubling reports, but no clear answers. Jeor Mormont understood that the Watch faced a crisis. If Mance's army attacked the wall, the Black Brothers would not be able to stop them. There were simply too few defenders. 3 castles, fewer than 1,000 men, trying to hold 100 leagues of wall against tens of thousands of wildlings. The numbers did not work. The Watch needed reinforcements, supplies, support from the realm. But King Robert was not interested in the war. The Southern Lords saw the wildling threat as a northern problem. The Watch was on its own. The old bear made a difficult decision. He would lead a great ranging beyond the wall, the largest in living memory. He would take a significant portion of the Watch's strength and venture deep into wildling territory. The goals were multiple: gather intelligence about Mance's intentions, determine what was driving the wildlings south, and demonstrate that the Night's Watch was still a force to be reckoned with. It was a bold plan, perhaps a desperate one, but Mormont believed it was necessary. Before the ranging could depart, other events were unfolding that would change the Watch's composition. King Robert visited Winterfell in 298 AC and recruited Eddard Stark to serve as Hand of the King. Ned went south, taking his daughters with him, and walked into the viper's nest of southern politics. His son Robb remained at Winterfell as the acting lord, and his bastard son Jon Snow, who had always felt out of place at Winterfell, chose to take the Black and join the Night's Watch. Jon Snow arrived at Castle Black with several other recruits in late 298 AC. He was young, idealistic, and had romantic notions about the Watch based on the old stories. What he found was very different from what he expected. The Night's Watch was not a glorious brotherhood of knights and heroes. It was a penal colony full of criminals and broken men, rapists served alongside thieves, murderers trained next to poachers, and all of them were cold, tired, and increasingly aware that they had sworn their lives away for an organization the realm had forgotten. Yet Jon adapted. He had his father's honor and his father's sense of duty. He made friends among the other recruits, including Samwell Tarly, a cowardly but good-hearted boy from the Reach. He learned to fight from the Watch's master-at-arms. He proved himself capable and earned the respect of his fellow brothers. When he took his vows in the Godswood at Castle Black, swearing before the old gods that he would live and die at his post, Jon Snow became a true brother of the Night's Watch. Jon's presence at the wall would prove more significant than anyone realized. He was a Stark, raised at Winterfell, trained by the best swordmasters in the north. He had Ghost, his white direwolf, a creature of legend that had not been seen south of the wall in centuries. And he carried the blood of House Stark, blood that had defended the wall for 8,000 years, blood that supposedly gave the Starks special connections to the north and its ancient magic. The Great Ranging departed Castle Black in 299 AC. Jeor Mormont led 300 men beyond the wall, roughly a third of the Watch's entire strength. This was an enormous risk. If the ranging failed, if those men were lost, the Night's Watch would be crippled beyond recovery. But Mormont believed the risk was necessary. The Watch needed to know what was happening in the far north. They needed to understand why the wildlings were gathering and what threat, if any, lay behind Mance Rayder's army. Jon Snow rode with the ranging. He was young and relatively inexperienced, but he was also capable and had caught the old bear's attention. Mormont saw potential in Ned Stark's bastard son. Perhaps he reminded the old bear of himself when he was young. Perhaps Mormont recognized that the Watch needed new blood, capable young men who could become the next generation of leaders. Whatever his reasons, Mormont kept Jon close and began training him in the realities of command. The ranging pushed deep into the haunted forest. They passed abandoned worldling villages, finding only burned huts and scattered bones. They found the Fist of the First Men, an ancient ring fort where they made camp. They sent out scouts and patrols, searching for Mance's army and trying to determine his intentions. And slowly, terrifyingly, they began to realize that something was very wrong. The dead were walking. Rangers found corpses that should not have moved, that attacked with inhuman strength and could only be stopped by fire. These were not the others themselves, but they were clearly the others' servants. The Whites, the risen dead, creatures of cold and darkness that the Watch had not seen in thousands of years. The stories were true, the legends were real, and the long night was returning. The great ranging ended in disaster at the Fist of the First Men. The others attacked in force, bringing an army of Whites with them. The Night's Watch fought desperately, but they were overwhelmed. The dead do not tire. They do not fear. They do not stop. The Black Brothers were slaughtered by the hundreds. Jeor Mormont led a fighting retreat, trying to get his surviving men back to the wall. Less than half of the 300 who had set out returned alive. It was the worst defeat the Watch had suffered in living memory. Mormont himself did not survive much longer. He was killed at Craster's Keep in a mutiny by some of his own men. These brothers, cold and starving and terrified, turned on their Lord Commander and murdered him. It was a betrayal that struck at the heart of what the Watch was supposed to be. Brothers were not supposed to kill brothers. The vows bound them together, made them family, but fear and desperation broke those bonds, and good men died because of it. Jon Snow survived the great ranging and returned to Castle Black. He had seen the others with his own eyes. He had fought Whites. He knew with absolute certainty that the threat was real. The enemy that the Night's Watch had been founded to fight, the enemy that most of the realm believed was a myth, was real and was coming. Winter was not just coming. Winter was here. But who would believe him? Who would believe any of the survivors? They were members of the Night's Watch, an organization that most of the realm dismissed as irrelevant. They were criminals and outcasts, men without honor or credibility. When they sent messages south, warning that the others had returned, the response was skepticism and dismissal. The masters did not believe. The lords did not believe. Even the Starks, who should have known better, were distracted by their own problems. Because while the Night's Watch was discovering that the ancient enemy had returned, the Seven Kingdoms were tearing themselves apart in another civil war. Ned Stark had been executed in King's Landing, accused of treason. His son Robb had been declared king in the north, leading a northern army south to avenge his father. The War of the Five Kings had begun, and it would consume the realm's attention and resources for years. Thousands would die fighting over crowns and thrones, while the real threat gathered in the north, patient and inexorable. Jon Snow found himself in an impossible position. He was a brother of the Night's Watch, sworn to take no part in the wars of the realm. But his family was fighting and dying in that war. His brother was a king. His sisters were hostages or fugitives. Every instinct told him to abandon his vows and ride south to help them. But he had sworn an oath. He had given his word before the old gods. And Jorah Mormont, before he died, had made Jon understand how important the Watch's mission was. The war in the south would end eventually, one way or another. But if the Watch failed, if the others breached the wall, everyone in Westeros would die. The brothers elected a new Lord Commander after Mormont's death. The choice was controversial, falling eventually to a compromise candidate who satisfied no one completely. But the Watch endured, as it always had. New recruits arrived, though never enough. Supplies came from the north, though never enough. The brothers repaired the wall and strengthened Castle Black's defenses, preparing for the siege they knew was coming. Because Mance Rayder's army was marching on the wall, tens of thousands of wildlings, men and women and children, fleeing from the others and desperate to get south to safety. Mance was not invading, he was evacuating. The free folk had seen what was coming from the north, and they were running for their lives. The Night's Watch was all that stood between them and safety. And the Watch, true to its traditional mission, prepared to keep them out. Jon Snow argued for letting the wildlings through. They were not the enemy. The others were the enemy. The free folk could be allies in the coming war, their warriors helping to defend the wall instead of trying to climb it. But most of the Watch rejected this idea. Wildlings were raiders and savages. They could not be trusted. Letting them south of the wall would be a betrayal of everything the Watch stood for. The Battle of Castle Black tested the Watch to its limits. Mance's army attacked from the north, while a diversionary force led by wildlings who had climbed the wall attacked from the south. The brothers fought desperately, outnumbered 100 to 1. They held the wall itself, using its height and strength to their advantage. They defended Castle Black's buildings and courtyards against wildlings who had breached the southern side. Jon Snow distinguished himself in the fighting, leading the defense on the wall and then the defense of the castle below. But the battle was not won by the Night's Watch alone. Stannis Baratheon, one of the claimants to the Iron Throne, arrived with his army and smashed into Mance's host from the rear. The wildlings, caught between Stannis and the wall, were defeated. Mance was captured. The immediate threat was ended, but the deeper crisis remained. The others were still coming. Winter was still here, and the Night's Watch was weaker than ever. Jon Snow was elected Lord Commander in the aftermath of the battle. He was young, barely more than a boy, but he had proved himself in combat and had earned the respect of many brothers. He was also a Stark, and the Watch needed the North's support. His election was controversial, decided by a narrow margin, but once chosen, he had the authority of the position. Jon became the 998th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, one of the youngest ever to hold the title. As Lord Commander, Jon made controversial decisions. He negotiated with the wildlings, offering them lands south of the wall in exchange for their help defending it. He sent brothers to abandoned castles along the wall, trying to increase the Watch's defensive capability. He trained wildling fighters and Watch recruits together, building an army to face the coming threat. Many brothers opposed these decisions. They saw Jon as a traitor, a turncloak who was betraying the Watcher's mission by allying with wildlings. But Jon understood something that many of his brothers did not. The Watcher's mission had never been to keep the wildlings out. The Watch existed to defend against the others. That had always been the true purpose. Wildlings were humans, warm and living, potential allies in the war against the dead. Fighting them was a distraction from the real enemy. Jon Snow, youngest Lord Commander in memory, was trying to save the Watch by redefining its mission to match what it should have been all along. The question was whether the Night's Watch could adapt quickly enough. The others were coming. The dead were marching. Winter had arrived, bringing with it the darkness and cold that the wall had been built to stop. And the Night's Watch, after 8,000 years of vigilance, was about to face the test it had been created for. The long night was returning, and this time, the Watch stood almost alone. Would it be enough? Could 1,000 men in black stop an army of the dead? And now, for the first time in 8,000 years, the Watch faces the very evil it was created to fight. The Night's Watch has always been more than its heroes and less than its ideals. It is men, flawed, desperate, and bound by oaths most would break. For 8,000 years, the Black Brothers have stood on the wall, watching the darkness beyond. Some served with honor and distinction. Others betrayed everything the Watch was meant to represent. And most fell somewhere in between. Ordinary men trying to fulfill extraordinary vows in a world that had forgotten why those vows mattered. The greatest heroes of the Night's Watch are those who understood the true nature of the mission and never wavered from it. Brandon the Builder stands first among them, the man who raised the wall and gave the Watch its purpose. Whether he was one man or many, whether he truly wielded magic or simply possessed extraordinary skill, Brandon created something that has endured for 8 millennia. The wall still stands. That alone speaks to his genius and his dedication. The last hero, whoever he truly was, earned his place in legend by refusing to surrender when all hope seemed lost. He walked into the darkness with his companions and returned with knowledge that helped turn the tide against the others. His journey represents the best of what the Night's Watch should be: courage in the face of overwhelming odds, determination to protect the realm regardless of personal cost, and willingness to venture into the unknown to find answers. Lord Commander Osric Stark brought northern strength and wisdom to the Watch at a crucial time. His rangings expanded the Watch's knowledge of the lands beyond the wall. His reforms improved training and organization. His leadership inspired his brothers and maintained the Watch's effectiveness during a period when it could easily have declined. Osric understood that the Watch needed to be proactive, to go out and meet threats rather than waiting passively behind the wall. Jorah Mormont, the old bear, sacrificed everything to serve the Watch. He gave up his lordship, his family, and ultimately his life in service to the Black Brothers. He led from the front, never asking his men to face dangers he would not face himself. His great ranging, though it ended in disaster, was motivated by the right instincts, the need to understand the threats facing the realm and to take action against them. Mormont died trying to protect the realm, killed by men who should have been his brothers. His death was a tragedy, but his service was exemplary. Jon Snow, young as he is, has already earned his place among the Watch's heroes. He faced the others and survived, He fought at the Battle of Castle Black and helped save the wall. As Lord Commander, he has made hard choices that many brothers oppose, but that may be necessary for survival. Whether his decisions prove wise or disastrous, his courage and dedication to the Watcher's true mission are undeniable. He understands that the real enemy is not the wildlings, but the cold and the dark beyond the wall. But for every hero, the Night's Watch has produced villains and failures. The Night's King stands as the darkest stain on the Watcher's history. He betrayed everything the Brotherhood represented, turning the Black Brothers into servants of the very evil they were sworn to fight. His 13-year reign of terror nearly destroyed the Watch and demonstrated how vulnerable the Order is to corruption from within. The fact that his true name was erased from history shows how deeply his crimes wounded the Watch's soul. Lord Commander Runsell Hightower betrayed the Watch's neutrality and independence for personal ambition. He tried to make the Black Brothers tools of Southern politics, instruments in the wars of kings. His attempt to forge alliances and gain political influence violated the fundamental principle that the Watch serves the realm as a whole, not any faction within it. When his brothers removed him from command, they were protecting the Watch's integrity and its mission. Countless deserters have stained the Watch's honor over the millennia. Every man who takes the vows knows the penalty for desertion: death. The harsh punishment is necessary because the Watch cannot function if brothers can simply leave when duty becomes difficult. Desertion is not just a personal failure. It weakens the entire order, reduces the number of men defending the wall, and sends a message that the vows can be broken without consequence. Every deserter is a villain, regardless of his reasons for fleeing. The mutineers who killed Jeor Mormont at Craster's Keep were perhaps the most despicable villains in recent Watch history. They murdered their Lord Commander, a man who had led them honorably and tried to save their lives. They killed him for food and warmth, out of fear and selfishness. They broke the most sacred bond between brothers, the trust that holds the Watch together. Their crime was unforgivable, and those who survived to return to the wall faced execution. But most brothers were neither great heroes nor terrible villains. They were ordinary men trying to do an impossible job under terrible conditions. They stood their watches in bitter cold. They fought wildlings in the haunted forest. They maintained the wall and the castles, performing endless, tedious labor that kept the order functioning. They lived lives of isolation and hardship, far from their homes and families, serving a mission that most of the realm had forgotten. These ordinary brothers deserve recognition too. The ranger who dies on patrol, killed by wildlings, never achieving fame or glory. The steward who spends his life managing supplies and ensuring the Watch has food to eat and weapons to fight with. The builder who repairs the wall year after year, his work invisible but essential. These men fulfill their vows quietly, without recognition, and they are the foundation on which the Watch stands. The symbolism of the Night's Watch runs deep in Westerosi culture, even if most people no longer understand what it means. The Black Cloak represents renunciation of the old life and dedication to a new purpose. The vows strip away everything that makes men divided, their houses and loyalties and ambitions, and replace it with a single unifying duty. The wall itself is a symbol, a barrier between civilization and chaos, between warmth and cold, between life and death. The words of the vow have been spoken for 8,000 years, passed down unchanged through countless generations. Night gathers, and now my watch begins. It shall not end until my death. These words bind every brother from the Lord Commander to the newest recruit. They are a promise, a commitment, and a burden. Every man who speaks them becomes part of something larger than himself, part of a tradition that stretches back to the age of the heroes. Some readers and students of these histories have developed theories about the Night's Watch and its future role in the conflicts to come. These are speculations, not facts, and should be understood as such. But they are worth considering because they reflect deep engagement with the Watch's history and its place in the larger story of Westeros. One popular theory suggests that Jon Snow is not just another Lord Commander, but a figure of prophetic importance. Some point to the legend of Azor Ahai, the hero who fought the darkness with a flaming sword. They note similarities between Jon's story and the prophecy. Born amidst salt and smoke, a warrior who faces the darkness, a leader who might unite the living against the dead. Others connect him to the prince that was promised, another prophecy that speaks of a savior in dark times. These theories are intriguing, but unproven. Jon Snow is certainly an important figure in the Watch's current struggles. He has faced the others and survived. He's been elected Lord Commander at a crucial moment. He's making decisions that could determine whether the Watch survives the coming crisis. But whether he is a prophesied hero or simply a brave young man trying to do his duty, only time will tell. Another theory concerns the nature of the Night's King and whether he could return. Some Meisters and readers believe that the 13th Lord Commander was not truly destroyed, merely defeated and imprisoned. They point to the strange occurrences at the Night Fort even after his fall, the sounds and shadows that brothers reported for centuries. They suggest that the Night's King might somehow return, perhaps using the chaos of the current crisis to break free from whatever bound him. This theory is darker and more speculative. There is no solid evidence that the Night's King survived his defeat. The stories clearly state he was cast down and destroyed, though the details are vague. But the theory reflects a deeper anxiety. The fear that the Watch's greatest internal threat might not be truly dead, that the corruption from within could return just when the Watch faces its greatest external threat. Some theories focus on the wall itself and the magic that sustains it. These readers note that the wall has stood for 8,000 years without melting, despite the laws of nature. They point to Queen Alisanne's dragon refusing to cross it, suggesting some magical barrier is woven into the ice. They speculate about what might happen if that magic fails, if the spells that keep the wall standing are somehow broken or disrupted. If the wall's magic were to fail, the consequences would be catastrophic. The greatest defensive structure in the world would become just a massive pile of ice, vulnerable to the others and their power over cold and winter. The barrier that has protected the realms of men for 8 millennia would fall. The Night's Watch would lose its greatest advantage. This possibility terrifies those who understand the Watch's mission, because without the wall, there's little hope of stopping an army of the dead. Other theories examine the relationship between the Night's Watch and the Free Folk, wondering if Jon Snow's controversial decision to ally with the wildlings might represent the Watch's best hope for survival. These theories argue that the ancient enmity between the Watch and the wildlings has always been a distraction from the real mission. Both groups are humans, warm and living, natural allies against the cold. If they could unite, if they could set aside centuries of hatred and warfare, together they might have enough strength to hold back the others. This theory is supported by historical precedent. When the Night's King threatened the Watch, the King of Winter and the King beyond the Wall allied to defeat him. Enemies became allies when facing a common threat. Perhaps history is repeating itself. Perhaps Jon Snow understands this better than his critics, and his willingness to work with the wildlings represents wisdom rather than betrayal. But there are counter-arguments to all these theories. Jon Snow might be just a capable young commander, not a prophesied hero. The Night's King is almost certainly dead and gone, not waiting to return. The Wall's magic might be unbreakable, or it might already be failing without anyone realizing it. The wildlings might prove to be unreliable allies, their cultural differences and resentments too great to overcome. These are questions without clear answers, mysteries that will only be resolved as events unfold. What we can say with confidence is that the Night's Watch faces its greatest test since the long night. The others have returned. The dead are walking. Winter has come, bringing with it the cold and darkness that the Wall was built to stop. The Watch stands ready, diminished but determined, armed with ancient knowledge and modern desperation. The Watch's future depends on many factors. It needs support from the realm, supplies and recruits, and recognition that its mission matters. It needs capable leadership, Lord Commanders who understand both the practical challenges of defending the Wall and the deeper purpose of the Watch's existence. It needs brothers who will hold to their vows even when those vows demand everything. And it needs the realm to wake up and recognize that the real war is not being fought in the south over thrones and crowns, but in the north against an enemy that threatens all life. The Night's Watch represents something essential in the world of Westeros. The idea that some duties transcend personal interest, that some threats require eternal vigilance, that some oaths must be kept regardless of cost. In a world dominated by ambition and treachery, where lords break their vows and kings betray their subjects, the Night's Watch stands as a reminder that honor and duty still matter. The brothers in black are far from perfect. They are criminals and exiles, broken men and failures. But they keep their vows. They stand their watch. They defend the realm even when the realm does not defend them. The cost of this service is enormous. Brothers give up everything, their names, their families, their futures. They serve in isolation and hardship, far from comfort or glory. Most die young, killed by wildlings or weather, or the 1,000 other dangers beyond the Wall. Those who survive grow old in service, knowing they will never return to the lives they left behind. They receive little gratitude and less recognition. The realm they protect has mostly forgotten they exist. Yet they serve. They endure. They stand watch through the long, dark nights and the bitter, cold winters. They maintain the Wall and patrol the wilderness. They train new recruits and pass down the old knowledge. They keep the flame burning in the darkness, even when that flame seems tiny and fragile against the vast cold. This is the essence of the Night's Watch. Persistence in the face of impossible odds, dedication to duty when duty demands everything. The story of the Night's Watch is ultimately a story about the price of safety. The realm sleeps peacefully because men in black freeze on the wall. Kings and lords play their games of thrones because brothers patrol the wilderness. Families grow and prosper because the watch guards the realms of men. The cost of this protection is paid by those who wear the black cloak, and they pay it willingly because they have sworn to do so. Whether the Night's Watch will survive the coming crisis is unknown. The others are powerful, perhaps invincible by normal means. The army of the dead grows with every battle, turning fallen defenders into new attackers. The watch is weak, undermanned, poorly supplied. The realm is distracted by civil war and cannot send help even if it wanted to. The odds seem overwhelming, the situation desperate. But the Night's Watch has faced desperate situations before. It survived the Night's King. It endured through ages of decline. It held the wall to invasions and betrayals and disasters that should have destroyed it. The watch has persisted for 8,000 years because its mission is necessary and its brothers refuse to abandon their duty. Perhaps that will be enough. Perhaps courage and determination and sheer stubborn persistence can hold back the darkness one more time. Or perhaps not. Perhaps the long night will return, and this time there will be no dawn. Perhaps the others will breach the wall and sweep south, turning all of Westeros into a frozen wasteland of the dead. Perhaps the Night's Watch, for all its history and sacrifice, will prove insufficient in the end. These possibilities cannot be dismissed. The threat is real, immediate, and terrible. If you see the Night's Watch differently after walking through its long history, after understanding the weight of 8,000 years of service and sacrifice, you are not alone. The Black Brothers deserve more than the realm gives them. They deserve support and supplies and recognition. They deserve to be remembered not as criminals and outcasts, but as defenders who stand between civilization and chaos. They deserve to have their mission understood and their sacrifices honored. Share your thoughts about the Night's Watch in the comments below. Do you think Jon Snow is making the right decisions as Lord Commander? Could the Watch have done more to prepare for the others' return? What role will the Black Brothers play in the wars to come? These are questions worth discussing, and your perspectives matter. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the origin and history of the Night's Watch, if you found value in understanding how this ancient order was founded and how it evolved over 8 millennia, consider subscribing for more journeys to the hidden corners of Westeros and beyond. There are countless other stories waiting to be told, other characters and events and mysteries that deserve this kind of careful examination. The Night's Watch stands tonight, as it stood last night, and will stand tomorrow night, watching the darkness, guarding the realms of men, keeping faith with oaths that most of the world has forgotten. The brothers in black ask for nothing in return, except that someone remember what they do and why it matters. Now you know their story. You understand their history. You recognize their sacrifice. That knowledge is worth something. That knowledge matters. The long night is coming. Winter is here. And the Night's Watch stands ready to face it, as they always have, as they always will. They are the watchers on the walls, the fire that burns against the cold, the light that brings the dawn. They are the Night's Watch, and their watch has not ended. Not yet. not while a single brother still stands on the wall with steel in his hand and duty in his heart. The shield that guards the realms of men has been battered and weakened by 8,000 years of service. But it has not broken, it has not fallen, and as long as men still swear the ancient vows and take the black cloak upon their shoulders, as long as the wall still stands and the darkness waits beyond, the Night's Watch will endure. Because someone must, because the vows demand it, because the realm needs defenders, even if the realm does not know it. This is a story of the Night's Watch, from its founding in the Age of Heroes to its desperate stand in the present day. It is a story of heroes and villains, of glory and decline, of duty fulfilled across 8 millennia of service. It is a story that is not yet finished, whose ending has not been written, and that ending will be determined by the choices made in the days and months to come, by brothers in black who stand on the wall tonight, watching the darkness, waiting for whatever comes. Their watch continues, the vigil endures, and the realm sleeps on, mostly unaware of the shield that protects it, the sacrifice that keeps it safe. This is the price of protection. This is the cost of safety. This is the Night's Watch,